Mushrooms can save the world.
When did your affinity and great admiration for fungi and mushrooms begin?
Well, my earliest memory of fungi and mushrooms was really when I was around 5 years old. My parents told me not to squeeze puffballs because if the spores of the puffballs got into the eyes of my twin brother, they would cause him to become blind. Well, telling a 5-year-old who's highly competitive with his twin brother this information, I readily put it to use and pelted my twin brother with as many puffballs as I could find. So parents should be careful about telling children what not to go towards because oftentimes that inspires them to be more interested.
Yeah, exactly. A light bulb went off in your head like, hmm.
But I was really amazed because when it would rain, we had a cottage up on Lake Erie. I grew up in Ohio until I was around 16 or so, and we have tremendous summer storms up there, and or had them, and then all these mushrooms would surge directly afterwards. So I knew when the rains came, these readily made missiles would soon appear. And it's interesting because kids like to stomp on mushrooms. I don't stomp on them anymore. I think it's kind of disrespectful. But kids love to stomp on mushrooms, and I wonder how much mushrooms have evolved, particularly to elicit that type of behavior in young children.
Interesting. Now, would that have any benefit for the mushroom?
Well, it certainly causes the spores to spread. In fact, mushrooms have evolved specifically to engage animals and insects to spread their spores. So they produce these wonderful scents, and these scent signatures can be very strong, and these fragrances creep across the landscapes and entice insects and animals to come find the mushrooms. And our olfactory senses are not as well developed as many other animals, and so fungi have species-specific scents and fragrances. Some mushrooms smell like anise, or like licorice, and some smell like bubble gum. And once you tune into these fragrances, you begin to realize that when you walk into a forest after a rainfall, the scent of the forest is largely coming from the outgassing of mycelial fragrances that's coming out of the landscape, and the mycelium is hidden in the ground.
So it's something that we might react to on a subconscious level.
Absolutely, and I think we're just beginning to understand that our brain has many deep-rooted receptor sites that have evolved specifically to pick out different foods from the native environment. Now we go to grocery stores, but not long ago we were absolutely dependent upon hunter and gathering and finding these delectable foods in nature.
Now, Paul, so you would play with mushrooms as a child and use them use them for certain things, playing with your brother. What, as an adult, did this affinity and admiration kind of grow with you as you were a teenager and then in your young adulthood? Was there some incident that happened where you just kind of opened up to this world that was there all along, perhaps waiting for you to open up to it?
Yeah, that's getting rather personal, but I don't mind talking about it. I have a very long-standing stuttering habit, and I used to stutter so much I couldn't complete a single sentence, and I was a very shy little boy, and I was the youngest in my family, so I stared at the ground a lot. That's how I found mushrooms. But I went through many years of speech therapy, and I still do stutter, and if there's a lot of noise in the background, and I may stutter during this interview, don't be concerned. Comparatively, it is largely cured, but my big epiphany was when I was around 16, 17 years of age. I did a very large dose of magic mushrooms, the so-called psilocybin types, and I didn't have a guide, and I did it by myself. And this was also in Ohio, and I had no idea how much to take, and I took way too many. And a big thunderstorm was on the horizon, and I climbed to the top of a tree to get a better view. And I was way up in this tree, and this emerging front was coming at me with lightning bolts and flashes and rolling thunder, and really, really fantastically visually speaking. And then the winds picked up, and oh my gosh, I found myself stuck in this tree in 40, 50-mile-an-hour winds and hanging on for dear life. And then I was stuck up there, and I was up there for several hours, absolutely terrified, and the tree was moving back and forth 4 or 5 feet at a time. And I was afraid that I would be shook off the tree. And meanwhile, this experience became more and more intense. And I'm stuck up there, and I realized, well, I'm up here. I might as well get something out of it. What should I concentrate on? And I thought to myself, Mom, my biggest problem is my inability to communicate. I'm not stupid, but my mind races way ahead of my mouth, and before I can articulate one sentence, I'm 4 or 5 sentences downstream. And so I kept on repeating to myself, stop stuttering now, and I said that over and over, and I came down out of the tree, and I didn't see anybody, and the next morning I was somewhat terrified of what would happen, and I started to speak, and my stuttering habit went away.
Wow. Wow,
And
that's profound.
now, I still stutter, and there are times, if I'm in front of the pioneers, in front of 3,000 people, I get a little nervous, If I'm lots of noise around me, it still comes out. But it's largely, I'd say, 98% cured.
Well, it sounds like to me too that your mind is so full and rich and filled with these amazing thoughts that I could see how it would be so much that sometimes it's probably hard to slow it down and articulate it at the level where we have to. Sometimes I wish we could all just plug into each other and tune in that way without having to verbalize what we're thinking.
Yeah, I think that people have a lot more in common than they realize, and it's our inability to communicate or find the common language, whether that language is between people or between ecosystems. And I think there's an ecological language in nature that we need to tap into, and that's where the mycelium and the fungi have become, in a sense, the language that I understand better now than I have ever before.
How important, why do you feel they're so crucial for us, not even for us, but for the planet at this time, at this point in time?
Well, I think we benefit from the historical lessons of our ancestors. And most people did not realize, nor did I, that the first organisms on land were fungi. They came to land 1.3 billion years ago. And plants followed 600 million years later. Fungi were the first organisms on land. They munched rocks. They came out of the ocean, hit the beach, and they produced these wonderful acids and enzymes that mineralize rocks. They take out calcium and manganese and iron, and in doing so, the rocks crumble, and this is the first step in generating soils. Well, fungi came to land, and then plants followed about 600 million years later, around 700 million years ago. 420 million years ago, the largest and tallest organism on land, so far that we know, is known from the fossil record. It's a fungus by the name of Prototaxites. In the Journal of Geology, Dr. Bryce and his colleagues from the University of Chicago Field Museum published a series of articles unveiling this mystery. Now, these fossils have been found since the 1800s, and they've been found in Quebec and in Saudi Arabia. They're 10 meters long, about 33 feet long, the largest ones, and around 4 feet in diameter. They stood up to 30 feet tall. The tallest plants on the earth at the time were less than 2 feet tall. So if you go back in time, and if you could picture these landscapes with volcanoes and eruptions and these great sort of short prairie lands, and the tallest trees were very rudimentary, but they were less than 2 feet. And you'd have these giant Prototaxites dotting the landscapes and being the tallest organisms on land. And now fungi develop symbioses with plants and animals, largely, as far as we can determine, from two asteroid impacts. 250 million years ago, at the border of the Permian in the Triassic period, there was an asteroid impact, and when it occurred, enormous amounts of debris was jettisoned into the atmosphere, and the atmosphere became choked with dust, and sunlight was literally cut off from the face of the Earth. Massive dieback of species. Over 90% of the species became extinct, and fungi inherited the Earth. The organisms that paired with fungi as a food source, or otherwise symbiotically, through natural selection, obviously survived. And then as the skies cleared, decades, we don't know how long it took, it may have been hundreds of years, as these new biological systems emerged, which were favored with those that paired with fungi, then we advanced forward, massive speciation, lots of new species evolved, and then 65 million years ago, bam, we get hit again, another asteroid impact. And the Earth again became shrouded in dust, and fungi re-inherited the Earth. From these two huge astrobiological catastrophes, life on this planet has evolved with fungi as being the foundation of the food web. And this is where I think what fungi are the grand molecular disassemblers in nature. They create soil. And it's the loss of soil and the robbing of the carbon bank in the soil food web that is leading to a lot of the diseases and famines and the loss of habitat that we're seeing today.
Well, not only then can we learn so much from the fungal kingdom, our actual lives are dependent on them.
Absolutely depend upon them. We have more in common with fungi than we do with any other kingdom. We actually evolved from fungi. In the Journal of Eukaryotic Microbiology 2 years ago, a group of 31 scientists co-authored a paper erecting a new super kingdom called Opisthokonta. And Opisthokonta joins Animalia and fungi together. We exhale carbon dioxide. We inhale oxygen. So do fungi. Plants do the opposite, of course. And I think people understanding that much of their DNA is fungally based and also based in bacteria that are allied with fungi, then we can see ourselves as great composites of other biological systems that are unified at this time in our evolutionary history as being humans. But we came from microbes, and it's this dance of microbes that has come into this unified presence that we know today as animals.
Would you say, Paul, then that fungi are more animal than plant, then it sounds like? So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And mycologists all over the world have been unified in their expression that the mycology departments do not belong in the botany departments of universities.
That's what I was just going to ask. Yeah, exactly.
Better placed in the zoology departments. We suffer from what's called mycophobia, a fear of fungi, and largely it comes from the influence of those of us who come from a British heritage or our social systems coming from that region of the world. They tend to be very mycophobic. They invented the concept of toadstool, which implies that it's dangerous, and that fungi are to be avoided. Eastern Europeans, Russians, native peoples all over the world, in South America, etc., have long understood that mushrooms are very, very useful and beneficial, and it's the fear of the unknown. Very few mushrooms actually are poisonous. There are some deadly poisonous mushrooms out there, and of course, if anybody gets poisoned by a mushroom, everybody in America knows about it. I don't think anybody died last year of mushroom poisoning. And usually the people that do die are immigrants coming from the Far East who mistake looking for paddy straw mushrooms and find mushrooms in the genus Amanita, which can be poisonous. But there's approximately 6,000 species of mushrooms in the Pacific Northwest. We have some of the richest biodiversity of fungi in the world. There's around 140,000 species of mushrooms out there. We've only identified around 14,000 to date. So over 90% of the species that are estimated we have not yet identified. And the mushroom-forming fungi represent about 10% of the kingdom of fungi, which is estimated around 1.5 million species.
Now, wow, that's just amazing. I can't think of any other kingdom that's been so largely ignored, almost like a whole galaxy waiting to be explored.
Well, I think that nature has within it, there's a lot of relationships, and there's been a lot of experiments over hundreds of millions of years, and we need to reinvest in the natural knowledge that is resident within our ecosystems, and understanding these interrelationships can give us many of the tools that we need in our biological tool chest to address many of the problems that we have today. And that's what I think is so cool.
And it sounds like, too, from I have taken permaculture courses, and they're telling us to observe and look at patterning. And I loved your part in the book about the mycelial archetype. Could you talk a bit about that?
Well, mycelium forms networks, and these networks of cells are very fine and thin. In a cubic inch of soil, there can be more than a mile of these fine cobweb-like cells if they were stretched end upon end. So they infuse and permeate all soils. They're the interface organisms between life and death, and they're really in the top 4 to 5 inches of soil. And these networks are resilient. They resist catastrophia. There is no point-specific place that can be harmed. Much like a tree, when the limbs of a tree, when the branches are broken, they tend to fork, and so this design has allowed these fungi to become the largest organisms in the world. The largest organism in the world to date is in eastern Oregon that has been thus far found. It is a mycelial mat of a honey mushroom called Armillaria astoi. It is over 2,200 acres in size. It's one cell wall thick. Now think about that, one cell wall thick. And if any cell biologists are out there, in a single gram of soil, there can be more than 100 million microbes. And so many of these microbes want to eat these mycelial threads that are with one cell wall. That is something that I think is a testimonial to the natural defense of mycelium, is that it's able to resist parasites. The mycelial networks mimic that also of the organization of neurons and of the computer internet. And I think the invention of the computer internet is the inevitable consequence of a repetition of a previously proven biologically successful model. And networks tend to be more resilient. They're able to adapt. They're able to take advantage of opportunities. They can remain latent. They can surge and exchange information, whether that information from the mycelial point of view is nutritional, whether it's engaging other organisms, even in the ecosphere, to help them be spread. These underground networks are so pervasive that now it is thought that most all plants, over 95% of plants that have been studied so far, are actually composites of fungal DNA, and they're infused with fungal threads. And the roots, they're called mycorrhizal fungi. Through the stems and the leaves, they're called endophytic fungi. And then the saprophytic fungi growing on dead organic material, and the parasitic fungi are climaxing, and like lions calling herds of animals, they fortify the immune system of those plants by challenging those which are weaker.
I read in your book you were talking about how you're hiking in the woods and you step on this, I guess, the mycelium. How aware are they of what's happening around them in the environment?
Well, they need to be extremely aware because there are so many different species that are competing for suddenly available natural resources. When you break a twig, and if you do a microbial analysis of the soil surrounding that twig, you would find likely thousands of species of fungi all eagerly wanting to consume that newly available piece of wood. So typically, from an evolutionary science point of view, first to food wins, and communities tend to survive over individuals. And so there's a community effort, in a sense, of these fungi to surge and grab that food source. And since they are in the mantle of the food web, they host upon them all sorts of other microbes that go hitchhiking along and also benefit from the fungal's ability or from the fungus's ability of being able to capture that new food. So these are leading-edge organisms. They come into landscapes, and they're edge runners. And one of the best places to hunt mushrooms are interface environments between forests and fields, along edges of paths. For whatever reason, for years we've noted there's more mushrooms that grow along trails in the old-growth forest than there are actually out in the middle of the old-growth forest. So it may be because animals are walking by. It could be from the compaction on the ground. More water stays more resident there longer. It could be a little bit more sunlight. We really don't know. But the fact of the matter is mushrooms that grow along trails will sporulate, and if they get onto your clothes, then you could be used as a vehicle for spreading the spores. So I think they've intelligently designed their strategies to take advantage of moving animals. And whether they're birds, humans, bears, or insects, we all participate in this movement of spores.
And would you say, Paul, that since the fungal kingdom is really one of the main, it's responsible for creating soil, it also has a symbiotic relationship with plants. So we are so dependent on fungi. I don't think most people know about that at all.
It is the tragedy of our ignorance could lead to our extinction, and not understanding that these biological systems and our biodiversity is dependent upon these microbes, and especially dependent upon fungi, is critically important for us to know. When I've been to Shanghai twice. Put a glass dome over Shanghai. How long would people be able to live there? You know, less than a week. What's happening across our planet with deforestation is that we're robbing the carbon bank, and we're undermining the food support systems, and it's leading to the loss of species that have given us life, that give plants life, that exhale oxygen. And without plants and fungi and animals working in concert in these elaborate dances, if we don't pay attention to that, we're going to destroy our biosphere and just project into the future. You know, Google Earth has some great images of the forests of China. Good luck in finding them. It's one or two little dots. Well, unfortunately, deforestation across the planet ultimately is going to undermine the very life support systems that have given us life to this date. I don't believe that all life on the planet Earth is going to become extinct. I don't believe that at all. But I do believe that many of the ascendant mammals that are in existence today will not be in existence 10,000 years from now or shorter on our present course. We are undermining the very life support systems that give us life.
Mm-hmm. And isn't this seems like it's something that happens to the Earth where just whole species are wiped out, and are we just speeding up that process?
Absolutely, and I think, you know, we're all shipmates on Starship Earth, and we have to pay attention to not only the voices of our ancestors, whether they be fungal ancestors or native peoples who have spoke very wisely about 7 generations into the future. That's something that we need to pay attention to. I just saw something on Fox News last night, and there was Hannity was on Fox News, and he was saying that, well, if there's 30 years worth of oil in the Arctic, well, that's a very short-term view. 30 years of oil in the Arctic is not going to solve the problem of us being dependent upon fossil fuels. We need to get beyond 30 years in terms of our viewscape. We need to look hundreds, thousands of years downstream, because what we have now in our biological armamentarium is we have lots of species in our tool chest that we can put into play that can help solve some of these critical issues. And I've been growing fungi on cellulose for over 30 years. I filed some patents on which I think will be great for generating ethanol from myceliated feedstocks. I'm not hip on cutting down the forest and growing ethanol on wood chips, but I do like the idea of using cereal straws. And that's something that, you know, just one example that fungi take cellulose and then make it into complex carbohydrates, which are long-chain sugars.
I was just reading about ethanol and how they're going to do some genetically modified corn to help break down the cellulose. Would the fungi do that, kind of naturally do that, or?
The fungi are doing that, have been doing it for hundreds of millions of years. And this idea of using, I'm not so concerned about a gene switch being turned off as compared to a gene being inserted from another organism. And I think that GMO research, from everything that we've seen, and we've been promised that GMOs are perfectly safe, and look at what has happened in the past 5 years. I think the profit motive is way ahead of reason, and we should be extremely concerned about the ramifications of the downstream effects that can occur because of short-term profit motives. So I think, again, fungal systems and looking at nature, there's lots of great experiments that have evolved and have proven to be successful in nature. Why not take advantage of that which has already been invented, as opposed to inventing something that is totally new? And I'm all about invention, and I think that humans can invent their way out of many of these problems. But I think that we need to invent our way out of these problems in partnership with many of the microbes that are here already to assist us.
I was reading in your book about I think, was he a Japanese scientist who did some studies with fungi, and he was showing how they actually took the shortest path to food. Could you tell our listeners about that? And I'm wondering, can they actually be schooled to do things, or are they already just doing it and we're tapping into that? I would love to hear more about that.
Well, no, fungi can learn, and they can adapt very, very quickly. And the experiment that you speak of was a maze experiment with a slime mold, where a Japanese group of researchers put a slime mold into a maze that was a petri dish agar maze, and the maze had 5 separate openings, and they put pieces of food, which turned out to be oats, at the end points of these 2 openings. And then when they ran the slime mold again through the maze, rather than randomly going out on to all 5 exits, they had memorized the previous route that led to the food, and so the next time they went in, they steered themselves directly to the most proximate or shortest distance possible to the food, thus proving to these Japanese researchers a form of cellular intelligence. There's fungi can adapt. One of the experiments that I did, I was working with a non-profit scientific organization called Battelle Laboratories, and they screened 27 of my strains. And my library of strains is very eclectic. I have over 300 strains in culture, many from the old growth forest. We have 10,000 square feet of clean rooms here, 21 laminar flow benches. These are the clean room hoods that we can do in vitro inoculations in front of. So I have a very interesting culture collection. And in fact, it's really part of our, should be considered part of our national heritage. And one of my strains, or 2 of my strains in this culture collection, Battelle Laboratories was working with the Department of Defense. And Saddam Hussein did use VX against the Kurds, and he did kill more than 10,000 people using this potent nerve toxin. And what Battelle Laboratories did is they took a suite of my best strains, and we incrementally increased the amount of VX. Actually, it's a component called DMMP, dimethylmethylphosphonate, and it's a core constituent in soman and sarin, which was also used in the Japanese subways that killed like a dozen people or more. This is about 10 years ago. And so DMMP is extremely potent as a neurotoxin. It prevents neurotransmission. And it is a very toxic chemical weapon. And when these strains of mine were increasingly given more DMMP or VX over time and decreasing amounts of other nutrients, after multiple transfers of these cultures, at the very end, 2 strains survived solely on VX as its only source of nutrition. There was nothing else in the media but VX. And the ability of these strains to adapt and produce enzymatic digestive systems specifically targeted to the nutrients that are available in this environment is testimonial to their resiliency. And from an evolutionary point of view, they are very smart. They're able to adapt to the available resources, customize digestive juices, and be able to dismantle them into elemental forms and build sugars that are then useful to all sorts of other members in the biological communities.
Could they grow on toxic spills or different things like that?
Absolutely, and there's lots of literature. There's several books out besides mine that came out in 2005, 2006 on mycoremediation, the breaking down of toxic waste using fungal systems. The advantage of mushroom-forming fungi, especially the forest mushrooms, is they produce a unique set of enzymes called manganese peroxidases. And manganese peroxidases allow these forest fungi to grow to several thousand acres in size. And they're a unique set of enzymes that can pull manganese out of rocks and also many other minerals. And this adaptive ability of this extremely potent peroxide-like compound allows these fungi to break carbon-hydrogen bonds that hold a lot of hydrocarbons together. So some of the work that we did with Battelle Laboratories also, we broke down diesel spills and soil that was saturated with oil using oyster mushrooms and broke down the amount of PAHs or TAHs, which is total aromatic hydrocarbons, from 20,000 parts per million, around 2%, to less than 200 in about 8 weeks, thus making a toxic landscape non-toxic, and our experiments and our test piles that were treated flourished with life, whereas the other control piles were dark, stinky, and largely lifeless.
Now,
and
are
so
these...
We've been able to demonstrate this in a variety of habitats, and one of the things we're keen on is mycofiltration, which is using wood chips and straw that's infused with mycelium as biological filters, preventing E. coli and silts and sediments going into sensitive watersheds. And that's what we're also working here in Mason County, Washington, is creating these buffers so that petroleum products as well as coliform products from farms don't harm the saltwater oyster and shellfish beds as well as the salmon runs.
This is incredible. Now, Paul, I think you said oyster mushrooms that were cleaning up the diesel. After they are done, are they unhealthy and kind of keeling over? Or
no,
what is
some of the mushrooms are almost 2 feet in diameter, and for an oyster mushroom,
Wow.
it's extremely large. And we were concerned also about any hydrocarbon residues, and there were no petroleum product residues whatsoever within the mushrooms. They were perfectly edible. Now, the other side of that, mushrooms can hyperaccumulate heavy metals. And so it's not, many of us in this field, we strongly advise people against consuming mushrooms around steel mills and places where there's heavy industry, because even though fungi can break down hydrocarbon-based contaminants, they tend to usurp and hyperaccumulate certain heavy metals. Mm-hmm. There's a fantastic species called the hideous Gomphidus glutinosus.
I love that name.
David Aurora gets credit for that, by the way. And this mushroom was found after Chernobyl had this accident. The Ukrainian scientists were very concerned about locals picking mushrooms in the woodlands. And they went around analyzing different mushrooms. And this mushroom, the hideous Gomphidus, hyperaccumulates cesium-137 more than 10,000 times the background contamination. The mushroom becomes radioactive. But in doing so, it decontaminates a large swath of land through its mycelial networks. And this is why I think these fungi, this is one example, they play a very important role in the ecosystem as ecological guardians for the benefit of the plurality of species in the ecosystem, to benefit the ecosystem so more trees will grow, more debris fields will fall into the mycelial networks, et cetera, et cetera. So by decontaminating a large swath of land, all these other organisms thrive, and even that mushroom becomes hot, it's only one hot spot compared to a large landscape that has been largely returned back to its natural system.
This is just amazing. This could be the answer to so many of the ecological problems that are facing us today. There's no chance that since we've made such a mess of the earth that the mycelial network would get so contaminated that it would falter, or is it just so strong and able to rebound? And
we know it's like rivets on an airplane. How many species do we lose before we hit catastrophic failure where the ecosystem cannot recover? And if you go to pavement and there's no soil, well, you can bet you've lost most of the biodiversity. A piece of pavement coming back is not going to come back as well as soil that's 3 to 4 inches deep versus soil that's been untouched. Roy Watling, however, he's a great mycologist in Edinburgh, did do a study where they had mycological records of the mushrooms being collected in one of the king's lands. And since it went back several hundred years, or 200 years or so, they had a pretty good list of species. It then was cut and deforested, and these species disappeared. And he was surprised, and I'm surprised too, that 80 years after the land was cut, the majority of those species, which had not been seen in 80 years, came back. So many of these species remain hidden in the landscape, waiting for the debris fields to become substantial enough. And here in the Northwest, we have these old-growth forests, and a species that I'm in love with is called agaricon, Fomitopsis officinalis. And this is a species that I've concentrated on. It's exclusive to the old-growth forests of the Northwest, Northern California, Washington, Oregon, and in British Columbia. And I got involved with the BioShield program of the U.S. Defense Department several years ago, and people can go onto Google and put in my name in smallpox, or else listen to a NPR national interview with myself, the former assistant director of the FDA and the founder of the bioterrorism program, and a representative from the U.S. Defense Department's BioShield program. And the reason I say this is that it's quite surprising, but a delightful story, that a species that we have exclusive to the old-growth forests of the Northwest is active against pox viruses, including smallpox. And after 1980, none of us have been immunized against smallpox. And so if there is a smallpox epidemic for which we have no treatment, the BioShield program is extremely concerned about finding antidotes or treatments. And the fact that we have this species in the old-growth forest that I cloned, and now we have 13 strains in culture, almost all the strains that have activity against pox viruses, some of them more so than others. But I think this is wonderful because it makes the argument that we should save the old-growth forest as a matter of national defense.
Well, and that's a language
that is the tip of the iceberg. What else is out there? I think we need to preserve these ecosystems because they have within them many of the solutions that we sorely need.
I was reading in an article about you about malaria, too, that some of the fungi have been shown to be able to, would it be fight malaria or offer?
There's a mushroom, another polypore. These are wood conchs, and they can be soft or hard, but they have pores rather than gills. So, a shiitake or button mushrooms, they have gills underneath. And these mushrooms are hoof-shaped, oftentimes attached to trees, either at the base of trees or on the tree. They are tough. You can't slice them with a knife. Most of them you can't. Some of them you can. And one series of tests that were done, these are in vitro tests, which literally means under glass, but they're in the laboratory. A fungus known by the Chinese as zuling, or otherwise pronounced as chuling, is called Polyporus umbellatus. That mushroom strain that I supplied was highly effective against Plasmodium falciparum, which is the malarial parasite. This was published in 1999. I'm really surprised that no one has picked up the ball since then because it showed 100% inhibition of this parasite. And many of these polypore mushrooms have these antimicrobial properties, and they oftentimes live in symbiosis with the trees to prevent other parasites from attacking the tree, but they live in the tree until the tree dies, and then they're the first fungus to reproduce on the tree. And so they sort of are in partnership. Tree, when you die, I get you first, and then I'll sporulate by producing a mushroom. So it's a very elaborate dance. Now, why this one mushroom from the old-growth forest is active against smallpox, we don't have a clue. There must be some interesting microbial bridge or antibody bridge or some sort of commonality between this fungus and pox virus. And so those are things that we need to really explore.
It's incredible. I have a list here too of some of the other projects that you've been working on. I have Mycoforestry. Maybe let's start with that one.
Mycoforestry let me just give a little bit of background. I'm 52 years of age now, and young men full of testosterone sort of have a death wish to see how tough they are, what they're made of, and it could be called testosterone poisoning. But I didn't go into the military. I went into the woods, and for 3 years I was a logger, and I cut down the old-growth forest. And I'm sitting, in these forests, and the chainsaws would start, and, by the afternoon, it's blue sky, it's massive death of trees all around you. They're outgassing this sweeteningly sick scent that anybody around a clear-cut knows. And then the log trucks would come, and we had 3 log loads. 3 logs would fill a truck. These are big trees. And I'm sitting in the brush, and watching these trees go out, and I'm going, where's all the carbon going? I see where it's going. It's going in the trucks. Where's it coming from? And so I started doing some calculations, and I thought, this is amazing. Think of it. 10,000 years ago was the end of the last ice age. And here in the Northwest, when the glaciers receded, most of the soil flushed into the ocean. Anybody who's been around a receding glacier can see it's all moraine fields of gravel and rocks and pebble, very little soil. Small lenses of soil survived. The plants then grew, and they died, and the fungal systems came in and decomposed the plants, and the soil lens became a little bit larger. This happened over thousands and thousands of years, and we end up in the Northwest. We have about 2 to 3 feet of topsoil supporting these cathedral forests that go in trees with that are up to 200 feet high. Well, and let's say in 1900 we first cut the forest here, and we took out all this carbon off the land, and then we burned. Well, that's 2 insults to the carbon bank. first you cut the trees, massive amounts of tons of carbon per acre going out, and then you burn it. Then what was common practice, and still is to a degree, is they would burn. And so you vaporize all that carbon going into the atmosphere. Then we march forward to 1950 or so, and they cut the forest again, and they burn again. That's 4 insults on the carbon bank. And then we go to 2000, and now they're cutting the trees at 40 years because the soils are getting thinner and thinner over this time, and because there's premature decline, which means the trees topple over at 40 or 50 years because the root wads can't hold the trees up. There's not enough soil in the ground for the roots to be able to penetrate. And so in the year 2000, we do the third cut, and we burn again for the third time. That's 6 insults on the carbon bank. Well, the thinning of soils, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand that you are robbing the soil for the benefit of timber, and in doing so, you're impairing the ecosystem. So mycoforestry involves engaging fungi to return nutrients back into the soil as quickly as possible. I'm opposed to burning. I don't think that's the right way to go about it. My wife and I bought 160 acres of land in Canada, and it's mostly a clear cut. And we planted 38,000 trees, and we didn't personally plant 38,000, but we paid for a crew led by a very, superwoman lady, and we did plant our fair share. But we took the 38,000 trees, and what we did do with a group of other volunteers, half the trees have wood chips placed around the base, and half don't. And then half of each of those had a mycorrhizal spore dip, a dip of beneficial fungi put into the roots. And so when the trees were planted, half with this mycorrhizal root dip and half without, half after they're planted with wood chip collars around the base, half without. And we want to see what the sequence of decomposition of the wood chips as a top dressing has to benefit the root zone in creating new soil, the release of nutrients. And so we've been charting this now for 4 or 5 years. We put over 1,000 trees into an Excel spreadsheet, and now we're noticing differences on the different treatments. And so we've established this land as a long-term old-growth forest project where we want future generations to be able to walk through this land and saying that Paul and Dusty planted this land as an intentional old-growth forest for future generations as a demonstration about better forestry practices, and that is not burning. We chipped 50% of the debris on this land, which it took months, and we made these enormous chip piles, which we then distributed around these young tree seedlings. So that's one example of mycoforestry. But even you go to your local landscaping or nursery stores, and most of the soil that you buy there has mycorrhizal spores added to the soil, because the mycorrhizae immediately seeks out the plants seek out the mycorrhizae, and as soon as they are unified, then the plants grow stronger. They're able to resist disease vectors. They need less fertilizer, and this is the way life is.
It's just incredible, Paul. I feel like I wish I could nominate you for a Nobel Peace Prize. Because I feel like you have a lot of answers, and that you're almost like a voice for the fungal kingdom.
I'm a mycelial messenger of my time.
You definitely are. Are you actually? I guess we are all related to mycelium, but it just seems like you have such a connection, and you're bringing forth this knowledge that it's just incredible, very powerful, and I think will have worldwide benefits for all of us.
Well, there's many other people that deserve credit, and most of whom have passed on. And so I really benefited from when I was around 18, 19 years of age. Dr. Alexander Smith and Dr. Daniel Stuntz, who are two great mycologists. I was sort of their mascot. I was really young. I was really nervous, and they were extremely kind to me because they knew that I had a really strong interest in the subject, and they hadn't connected all the dots that I have connected recently, but they put the dots on the paper. So I was able to make connective ideas from many of the ideas that they were involved in originating or passing on from their own teachers. And I think it's really important that we mentor children and even adults now with this concept that we live to the benefit and from the benefit of a plurality of organisms that are working synergistically. and we need to invest in symbiosis and biodiversity. This is what got us here, and this is the only thing that's going to take us forward.
Hmm. Now, do you feel, this is kind of maybe a question from left field, but would it benefit the mycelium for humans, for us just to kind of go our merry way and die out? And would the planet then rebound and the mycelium maybe take over again for another fungal kingdom age?
Yes. Would it benefit? I think would the mycelium regret that we're not here? They might. I think that fungi and mycelium has a sense of humor, and this
I
is
love
where you
that.
you have to really be involved in the subject to see this. But it's uncanny, and then it's a little nerve-wracking sometimes. But they have a personality, and some of these personalities engage with humans in wonderful ways. And what's nice about the field of mycology is people are constantly laughing. There is constantly things that are happening that just blow your mind, and you wonder, how is this possible? And then you understand that the mycelium oftentimes is engaging you and titillating your imagination by showing you things that really are funny. And there's so many examples of that.
What's one example, if you could share with us?
Well, there are luminescent fungi that glow in the dark, and people back east have seen this. Another thing from my childhood. There's foxfire fungi that make logs illuminate, etc. And some of these luminescent fungi are so bright that you can read books at night.
Wow!
In your tent. And who would think that mushroom hunting at night would be fun? I mean, if you say, let's go mushroom hunting and it's midnight, the person will look at you and go, are you nuts? And then you go out into the woods, and the woods is alive with these luminescent fungi.
Wow.
And people go, oh my gosh, I had no idea. And they realize that there is a nocturnal landscape of mushrooms glowing in the woods. Wow. And why are they producing this light? Well, they are producing an enzyme called luciferase that liberates a photon from phosphorus, as do other organisms. And now we know that these luciferase enzymes are extremely useful in biomedical science, as well as breaking down toxic waste, and have other implications that we're just now discovering. So there's an example. There's mushroom hunting at night, luminescent fungi. Oh my gosh, now we have some anti-cancer medicines that are coming from these luminescent fungi. So
it's almost like they're attracting us, and then there's such a huge wealth of knowledge and application that we can use from that initial kind of pulling us in.
You've hit the nail on the head. These fungi have elicited exquisite mechanisms of attracting animals. And insects are animals, bears are animals, and so are humans. And we are also enticed and fooled and beguiled by them. And I think that, that shows how clever they are.
Well, it's interesting. I'm glad that I'm talking to you, too. On a personal note, when I was living in Hawaii, I was walking through a forest one day, and at that time I was meditating a lot, and I was kind of meditating with the trees and the ginger and all these other plants, and then I came upon this mushroom kind of stuck in the middle of this. It was like just a field almost, just this mushroom sitting there. And I walked by it, and then I felt so drawn back to it. So I went and sat by this mushroom, and I sat there probably for an hour and really kind of tapped into this. I can't explain it in words, but it was very powerful, and it was almost like this connection I can't put into words, but I've always remembered that. And then reading your book, it kind of made me think maybe there was something to that.
And in the tropics, and 2 days later, it's gone.
Yeah.
But the mycelium is there all the time, maybe for hundreds of years. And some of these mycelial mats may not produce a single mushroom that's visible to the unaided eye for hundreds of years.
Wow.
And so they are literally the invisible landscape that infuses all habitats. And I'm looking right now at some beautiful forested land where I live in Mason County. And if I could just see mycelium throughout the forest, it would have the exact same shape as the trees and the leaves and the Douglas fir needles that I'm looking at right now.
Wow.
So if you removed everything else and all you saw in this invisible landscape was mycelium, you'd still see the same shape and form of the landscape that you're looking at right now.
It's almost spiritual on some level. I'm not a
I,
religious person, but I am more spiritual. And just it reminds me of what you're saying. It's this invisible web of life that's supporting us all.
it is spiritual, and I think this goes full circle. My mother is a well-respected charismatic Christian, and I grew up in a charismatic Christian environment. And one thing that I think we hold in common is whatever concept of God that we have is inadequate to the concept. We can't fully conceive that which God is. And now, as we explore the universe, and we're finding all these other planets around suns, and the inevitability in many scientists' mind that we'll find life on other planets, it just, I think, speaks to the enormity of the universe and the inadequacy of our ability to comprehend the infinite. And I think those two thoughts coming together, we have a lot more in common. And we will go back into this fabric of the universe. And fungi are going to be resident within all of us, and not too far from now, if they aren't already. But as we decompose, we become soil again. And I see us as being recycled stardust, and I think these fungal systems, give us life. And I think there's something of great meaning there. I may not be able to put my finger on it, may not be able to fully comprehend it at this time, but I have an intuitive sense of there's a greater truth there, and I think that we're navigating towards it.
And one thing that struck me too, when I was reading all about this, I thought really that the fungi are kind of the bridge between life and death on some level, even though that's a little airy-fairy maybe, but
No, you're absolutely right. They are the interface organisms between life and death. Fungi decompose organic matter, plants, animals, and they also can break down rocks. And so these are recycling nutrients and also breeding the very habitats that give rise to life. So they are the interface organisms between life and death.
And I could see how in other cultures they would actually see these the fungal kingdom as elders, as having knowledge, because they do bridge that life and the edge between life and death.
I absolutely agree. And Native Americans and indigenous peoples who are intimate in contact with their environment, came to look at the world in many ways how scientists view the world today. And one example of that is Native Americans in particular oftentimes talk about spirit organisms and spirits in the forest. And if a person becomes ill, they become ill because of a quote-unquote evil spirit. Well, whether a shaman describes the cause of that disease as an evil spirit, or a scientist describes it as an invisible microbe that you can see with a microscope, the two hold in common the view of the unseen having an impact on your health. And I think that speaks to the inherent intelligence and wisdom of many Native American cultures and the heritage that they've passed on, is they may not have microscopes, but or have had microscopes, but they came to the same realization that we are coming to today, is that we have to live in balance with our ecosystem, and when we're in balance or diseased, then these spirit microbes come out of the landscape and infect us, whether that's coliform bacteria, whether it's pox viruses, whatever.
So it's basically the same idea and thing. It's just with different names and ways of looking at it. Paul, a couple last questions, and then if you have anything else you'd like to add. I'm wondering, if I'm living in Santa Barbara, a small town but urban at the same time, are the mycelium still around me in Santa Barbara?
Just walk outside and find a piece of wood on the ground and tip it over. There's mycelium everywhere. It's literally underfoot, all around you.
And how do I recognize it?
It's white, fuzzy, looks like cotton or cobwebs. And it's literally all around you. Now, I've been to Santa Barbara many times, great place, and, during your wetter seasons, the mycelium surges, and the drier seasons, it tends to become thinner or retreat. But there's mycelium virtually everywhere. Every footstep that I take here in the Northwest, I estimate that I'm walking on 300 miles of mycelium per footstep. Now, Santa Barbara could be 100 miles of mycelium. I haven't done the calculations, and that is a rough estimate. I probably have underestimated the amount of mycelium there is per footstep. But as we create footsteps across the environment, in these ecological footsteps, in the debris fields that we create microscopically, these fungi surge up and take advantage. So they track humans, they follow humans, they're extremely interested in our activities. And when the resources are being depleted to fail to feed their food chains, that's when they become more elaborate and more sophisticated in seeking alternative methods of sequestering nutrients.
And of possibly getting our attention.
And getting our attention. Yeah.
That's so interesting. Now, with the mycelium this is another question that I'm not a scientist, but would the mycelium in Santa Barbara be in contact with the mycelium where you are? Does the network flow does it go that far, or is it more localized?
That's an excellent question. And we believe that, for instance, it is hypothesized that Mount Hood in Oregon is sheathed with a contiguous mat of matsutake mycelium, the pine mushroom, Tricholemma magnivelari, which is a edible and choice mushroom that the Japanese go crazy over. Well, it's now these mycelial nets are so large and vast. We know they're in constant biomolecular communication with the ecosystem, and how these feedback loops flow between the receptor sites and the sets of fields of receptor sites between these mycelial mats is a part of science that's in its infancy right now. We don't fully understand, but the theories that have been presented and the examples that we can find show there are intermycelial communication pathways. How far these pathways go over geographical distances, we don't know. We're pretty sure they go over thousands of acres. Whether they go over hundreds of thousands of acres, we just don't know. But theoretically, they could be.
This is amazing. I feel like we need to have a mycelium admiration day in the U.S.
I would agree. I vote for that.
You'd have to think of a good date, a very wet part of the year. Now, Paul, if someone listening, if one of the listeners wants to know what they can do to ensure, or maybe what they could do to get connected with the fungal kingdom in their own life, and maybe you could talk a bit about how can the fungal kingdom help us reconnect with nature ourselves?
Well, I recommend that people join the local mycological society. There's one in the United States and virtually every large city. And the North American Mycological Association is the parent nonprofit organization that to which the local societies are members. And so in Washington State, Oregon, California, there's lots of mycological societies. I recommend getting some field guides to mushrooms. David Aurora's books by 10th Street Press are some of the best, especially a little pocket field guide. It's called All That the Rain Promises and More. It's fun. It's great color photographs, and so that's a book that I also recommend. And then I recommend that you also go out into nature with your children, and for both of you to rediscover that which has been hidden in the landscape in which you've grown up. Many adults have told me that their favorite experiences when they were young was when their parents took them out into the woods and they collected mushrooms. It was like a big Easter egg hunt, and the kids were constantly rewarded with their parents' attention and excitement when they found a new mushroom and brought it to their basket. And so it's something that sticks with you for a long time. And I think being in the woods, away from the computers, away from the cell phones, away from traffic and buildings, and reconnecting with nature, and deeply inhaling and understanding that the fragrance signatures that make up the mosaic of scents in the forest are composites of mycelium that's outgassing these fragrances to entice you, to titillate your nose, and to encourage you to find them.
Paul, would you like to tell our listeners about your book, Mycelium Running?
Yeah, Mycelium Running is my latest book. It's book number 6 for me. I can't believe I'm saying that. I can't believe I've written any books. But it is by far my best work, and it's a book I describe as a manual for the mycological rescue of the planet. And it's published by 10th Street Press, It's a full-color book. It's several hundred pages long in full color, and describes in great detail, with many references and supportive photographs and stories as well as experiments, many of the things I've spoken about during this interview. So Mycelium Running, it's the first book that I've written that towards the end of the book, I was really concerned that if I had a heart attack or a car accident, the book wouldn't get out, because I think the book is more important than the person who wrote it. And when a book becomes more important than the author, I think that's very significant. And I have the sense that this book is more important than me.
Wow. And could you, Paul, tell our listeners what exactly does Mycelium Running mean? I was curious about the title.
Mycelium Running has several meanings. In the laboratory, when we grow cultures of fungi and they produce mycelium, we oftentimes run with the mycelium. And the mycelium will surge across a petri dish, and they'll be a fan of fast growth. And we have learned that running after that mycelium gives us the best cultures. And oftentimes when we're doing experiments, and there's many choices, when the mycelium makes a choice that is most successful, the mycelium runs out in advance of the other experiments. And so since the mycelium is running after us, and we're running after Mycelium Running seemed to be like a good title to me.
That's great. I was wondering because I thought, running with Mycelium, it's wonderful. It's probably what we're doing all the time, actually.
Yes, we are.
And Paul, would you say then, it sounds like you've already said this, but I would just like to hear it again. Would you say the mycelium, even though we have made many mistakes as a species, would you say they're willing to teach us a better way of living on the earth?
I think these fungi and their mycelial networks are universities of knowledge. They're willing to teach us. Are we willing to listen? We need to become better students of nature and let go of our fear-based systems where we fear the unknown. I think we need to grapple with the unknown, engage it, understand it, and be amused by it, because I think nature is inherently good and loves to laugh. And I think good humor is infectious, so to speak, and I think that is something that is also one of the rewards of dealing with these fungi is that they have there's great camaraderie between the species.
That's wonderful. And Paul, if you could give your contact information and also maybe tell me a bit about your business, just the name of your business and your website.
Right, the name of the business is Fungi Perfecti, and we're at fungi.com, www.fungi.com. And I was on internet very early, so I'm very happy to have that name. And Fungi Perfecti has a catalog, and we teach seminars. We sell mushroom kits for kids, and we work with lots of medical universities. We have a very, very broad spectrum of products for the culinary arts of using mushrooms for food, as well as all sorts of science experiments, many books, etc. So it's a great website, and I have a great team of employees here who are unified in this common mission.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jill. It's a pleasure.